Hi everyone, I'm Stanislav Budnitsky, the postdoc here at the Russian Eastern European Institute. I study Russian media and internet politics, so since the beginning of this conflict I have been trying my best to follow the avalanche of reporting, primarily in Russia, also in Ukraine, and as best I can here in the West, the English-speaking reporting on the conflict. And so I just want to share some observations. There's nothing revolutionary about them. I guess my point is just to convey to you what's happening currently in Russia with regards to the framing and the narrating of the war that's going on. So, and I think this is a general caveat that any honest scholar should make at this point about their analysis of the situation, because it is necessarily impressionistic or partial or anecdotal. And I see a lot of great anecdotal observation from scholars on Twitter, let's say, who just use their pre-existing expertise on the subject to make some inferences or conclusions. But it is just that, and we should really take any analysis with a grain of salt, a grain of skepticism, and not trust any sort of major big claims about anything really at this point. So it is with this understanding that I will delve right into it. So first I'll give just a little background, just so we're on the same page about the Russian media landscape. What is the landscape, February 2022 as all of this unfolded, and then I'll share more specifically some observations about Russian mainstream kind of state-aligned media narratives. And then what alternatives basically are available to Russians. And I think the title is really key here, sort of what do Russians know in a sense of what is available to Russians, but not what do Russians think, let alone how are Russians going to act. And again, this ties to what I just said about making any claims about what they actually think was already difficult enough in just like a generally authoritarian context, and especially at a time like this, it's really hard to gauge how they are perceiving or interpreting what is available to them. So the best we can do is look what's available, see some responses, and kind of try to piece together what's happening. So first of all, what type of media do Russians consume? Russia has the largest internet audience by numbers in Europe. It is also, in terms of percentage-wise, it is very high, on par with sort of the more developed Western countries, let's say. And generally, the internet, the quality of the internet, the broadband availability is very high in Russia. So Russia is a very internetized country, let's say, or a digitized country. So there is no trouble, kind of technical issues or logistical issues of accessing the internet. So I mean, the numbers are here. I'm not gonna reiterate them, but what the numbers tell us is that a big chunk of Russians are already online and have been for some time. There's still a small part of population, just under 20%. Well, I guess not that small. Who only use TV, and this number is way higher for 60-plus-year-olds, and they are sort of the electoral base, if you will, of the regime. So in that sense, it is important. They are the ones who show up to vote, basically. But yeah, the internet accessing, the ability to access alternative opinions or alternative narratives to the ones that are being conveyed through the TV is there, and that's kind of the key thing to understand. That should one want to, there is a technical ability to do so, and the means to do so. So what do Russians get when they actually do turn on the TV? The Russian, I'm not going to go into the whole background just because we don't have that much time, but I think if you're in this room, you probably know that Russian media landscape sort of has been shrinking, if you will, or the space of kind of media freedom or media alternatives. It has been a gradual process. It has come in a number of waves. In the early 2000s, it was first about controlling the TV the mainstream TV stations. Then it moved to, and by them or they, I'm referring to the Kremlin, so to speak. It was then about the radio stations, the newspapers. So going from the most influential sources to the smaller ones. After 2012, it also turned very rapidly to the online sphere, to kind of regulating the online sphere in a way that's not been done before at any point. And something happened as well with the tone, with the style, with the tone, with the narrative of kind of pro-regime or state-aligned media. And the scholars of Russian media and politics told September, they called it edutainment. You can probably guess that it's a combination, Parvano, of agitation and entertainment. And so I'll unpack this term because this edutainment phenomenon is really key to understanding how the Russian audiences were turned or I don't want to use the word brainwashed, but I want to use a more sophisticated term that I'm looking for, but basically into this kind of frenzy of thinking that the whole world is out to get Russia, that Ukraine is fully infested with Nazis, that all those things that essentially built up support for first actions in 2014 and thereafter, and the current crisis that's happening right now. And so the entertainment part is basically the borrowing of Western entertainment formats of those daily talk shows, whose child is this, let's do the DNA test, live reveal, kind of those really crazy shows. What is it, Jerry Springer, those type of shows, and merging them with the your CNN 6 political scientist or political commentator kind of panel. So this is a weird combination of the two, and so since 2012, basically every mainstream channel got one of those shows. So there are about, I'd say, 4 or so or 5 of them altogether. They last for hours. They're on every night, and then special editions on the weekends. This is one of the most prominent or most notorious, however you want to look at it. They're very theatrical, like in the staging of it, the sets, the arrangements, very dramatic. So this, for example, is from, I think, yesterday. It says, like, what does the West want? Or, like, what is West trying to, to get? What's the West game here? And there's usually a token liberal, a token American. There's actually like a Russian-speaking American who goes from show to show, who's kind of the punching bag as a representative of the Americans. There are several Ukrainians there who are kind of like defending the Ukrainian position, but yet they're keep showing up on this Russian shows for years. There's token liberal, as I said, but most of them, over half of them, are sort of very, very extremely pro-state, pro-regime, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll show you a little clip. So hopefully the audio and video works. Just a 30-second clip of their actually. Once in a while, they would actually get into like a physical fight, and it wouldn't be unlike the Jerry Springer show. It wouldn't be just the participants. On a number of occasions, on multiple occasions, the actual host would come and and punch one of the participants. At one point, I believe a host pulled up a gun on one of the participants. So this is one of those episodes, just to give you a taste of what we're talking about. Oh, is there volume, or is that not available to us?
This is, so the volume is cutting in and out.
Okay.
And unfortunately, all the button smashing I have done has not made it actually work.
I think maybe just about putting it up, because I think it was pretty low. So let's see if this helps.
Признать право правду, что там погибают детей. Обстрел идет по людям, по детям. Я был возле памятника, 200 детей погибли за это время.
Мерзавец, фотографии покажи! Ты фотографии самовара голода показываешь! Что?
So, this is the host of the show, the one who, So I should have provided context. Sorry about that. So the first person was basically this is from a few years ago, but they're talking about Ukraine because Ukraine has stayed in the Russian media, top the Russian media sphere all of this year. So one of them is saying that there are 200 dead and there are children among them that were died by Ukrainian, bombing or fire. And then the second one, who's one of those kind of Ukrainian actually Ukrainians, but appearing on the Russian shows and sort of representing the Ukrainian position, is saying show me basically evidence, show me any evidence, and so then the host comes out with the punches. So this agitainment has been a feature and a mainstay on Russian TV since 2012, and basically has been responsible. Not single-handedly, but largely responsible for this constant atmosphere of almost wartime. We all kind of agitprop, the revolutionary agitprop that keeps people kind of on their toes. So there are still alternative media organizations. As I said, the kind of the space for them to exist and exist freely has been shrinking. It has been done through various means, by either just shutting them down either under some pretense, by forcing out their previous management and installing new and loyal management, which completely overhauls the editorial policy pretty much literally overnight. So it happened to media brands that have been there for decades and have been basically synonymous with high quality, highest quality journalism, and then literally in a week of editorial change, you would have a completely different, same branding, same style, same visuals, completely different content. Through various legal means. So for example, the year of 2021 was a year of basically labeling most, if not all, of these organizations and many others so-called foreign agents. So anyone who receives any money from abroad, whether it's a governmental grant or some personal donation, as a foreign agent, which then drives away advertisers and drives away the people who are willing to go on them, to risk their career or to jeopardize their career. So it basically makes their life much more difficult. And also, I forgot to include it, it means that before saying anything, before a Facebook post that they do, before any report, before anything, they have to include this huge paragraph which states that, this message that you're about to see is conveyed to you by an entity that has been designated a foreign agent by the Russian state, blah, blah, blah. It is a humongous paragraph that comes before every single message, whether it's on Telegram, Facebook, on their actual channels, in print, everywhere. So there are some alternatives. Again, my point is to say to you that even today, Russian media sphere is actually still, I know there's always, and a lot of my colleagues are comparing to China, and I have written with my Chinese colleague on this kind of a comparative study. So it is still, and what I'm hearing from my colleagues studying Chinese media and politics, Russian situation is still much better than China's, with everything that has been going on. So it's important and interesting to keep in mind because of the constant kind of Russia-China comparisons, and there are still, with increasing similarities, there is still some differences. So it is available to the Russian population, kind of should they want to reach out and get and I'm calling it alternative as opposed to independent, because I don't believe that any media is independent. You're always dependent on some, whether it's ad money, whether it's the state, whether it's your owner. So I'm calling it alternative as in other than the dominating kind of state narrative is what I mean by that. And so what about the online sphere? So once, if you want to get an alternative viewpoint and you go online, so what's happening there? And so the point that I want to make here is that at least in the internet sort of early days, early years, there was this common belief, which was actually rooted in the fact that, an online user is, more educated, more liberal, younger, an urbanite, etc., etc., etc. And these things generally tend to be true, or at least have been true in the early stages of internet dissemination. Once you have basically the whole nation online, or 2/3 of a nation online, the internet really reflects the general, population's opinions, interests, cravings. And so, sure, it probably is still the case that, an average internet user in Russia is still somewhat more liberal than an average, TV viewer or just an average person in general. There is still that tiny qualitative difference in terms of, background, beliefs, etc., support for the government. But to presume that there is, the people watching TV and then all this activists that all they do online, they go online and then network and organize against the state. No, most people are online, for porn and cute cats, right? That's just statistics. And so then those who are left who are actually very political, the breakdown is, again, still online, more, let's say, liberal or anti-regime than offline, but on the whole, the supporters with 85% of people having internet access online has just as many supporters of the regime. So I'm just trying to convey to you that this kind of dichotomy, TV watching, offline, Putin-loving publics, and then this online anti-Putin activists that are organizing 24/7 online is just not, it just doesn't exist. And so these are just several rankings of the top websites by audience, top Telegram channels. Are people familiar with what Telegram is? Right, it's an app that is basically founded and developed by a Russian developer. It's not under, let's say, Google or Facebook. So it's much, I suppose, has less regulation, and so it's become this kind of alternative public sphere in Russia. But again, if you look at the top 10 channels by popularity, sure, some of them are really extremely, for example, number 2, extremely anti-regime and anti-Putin, anti-current Russian government. But number 3 is the head of the Russian parliament. Number 9 is the head of RT, Russia Today, the sort of the now famous media conglomerate. Number 10 is the spokesperson for the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So even in this sphere that's supposed to be kind of the freest of them all, half of the top 10 most popular channels are state-affiliated and pro-state. So it's a little better on the social media. So this is the top ranking of the top 10 most cited, so sort of most retweeted, most shared on Facebook news sites. And number 1, again, is this independent, alternative, kind of critical of the state news organization. So are number 7 and number 8, for example. But again, 7 of the rest are either just state-run, for example, again, the Russian version of RT, or Tsargrad, which is even further to the right, to the more conservative than the Russian state itself. It's kind of a Christian Orthodox conservative channel, or Lenta or RBC, RBK, which are examples of the ousting of the management. These are the 2 examples where they just ousted the entire journalistic team and just replaced it with other people under the same brand. So again, even if this Kremlin critical media is number 1, most of the list is very much supportive. So again, just to reiterate the point that I'm trying to make is that there are no longer this two completely different spheres. And so while information is available online, people go on the internet with their, identities, pre-existing identities and interests. And so if you're a Putin supporter and you go online, sure, you might bump into an alternative opinion, and I'm sure some of those people, some percentage, are starting to, question their views or starting to look for alternatives and maybe ultimately become, let's say, oppose Putin or vote against Putin. But the reality is this is still a tiny minority, right? So if you like Putin offline, you're going to, like Putin online and consume those other 7 media and retranslate those other 7 media sources. So let's move on to the actual coverage. And I guess I've taken a bunch of time, so I'm going to try to speed it up from here onwards. This is actually a Twitter feed, which again is an example of how academics are trying to kind of do this micro-analysis of this live events. And this is a colleague of mine, Paul Good at Carleton University in Ottawa. And so what he did is basically content analysis. He looked at the transcripts of Russian language reporting on Ukraine in the lead up to the invasion of last week. And so he just tested it for a bunch of different words, the names of the breakaway separatist republics, or the word genocide, which is the claim that Russian authorities are making, the genocide of ethnic Russians in Ukraine, and this is one of the arguments why the Kremlin why it should be there. And so what we see here is that, and so presumably, right, if there had been genocide all along, and if the Kremlin, really, truly, deeply has been caring about this for months or for years, it would have been in the news, which essentially retranslate the Kremlin's viewpoints. But what we see both with the names of those, breakaway republics, and with the word genocide even, that the spike begins just days before the invasion and really kind of takes off basically during the invasion, right? So it's not something that has been in the news for years, has been talked about and discussed. I mean, it has been. We saw kind of like a fight over it, right? But there's not been any kind of new developments or anything, because there was almost nothing about it, as you can see, for a while. And then this kind of huge spike that already accompanies the action rather than the other way around, this serving as a genuine motivation for subsequent action. But again, just to remind what I began with, this is a snippet. Maybe someone will come out with an alternative explanation, right? Maybe there was some other plausible reasons why it wasn't in the news, even though, let's say, the authorities cared, right? So even this analysis, while it's interesting and instructive and something to think about, we shouldn't draw out kind of definitive conclusions from it, or some big picture conclusions from it. Now, I watched the most Russian TV those Russian TV shows I have in years over the weekend. I watched every single kind of weekly roundup analytical program. I think 5 or 6 of them over 4 different channels to basically try and distill it into kind of the messaging, the key narratives, the kind of the state-aligned narratives. And what I saw, first of all, what struck me is incredible, near-identical reporting across the channels. And what I mean by that is that basically the segments of each hour or 2-hour long program were almost identical. And this is that, right? So each one reported on the capture of Chernobyl nuclear plant. Each one reported on the taking of this one village in the so-called Luhansk People's Republic, or the resumption of water supply to Crimea. Each one definitely had a section that kind of justified, basically explained to the audience from completely obviously the Kremlin's perspective why Russia invaded. So each one of them had one of these segments that used same sound bites, same speakers, same shots often, identical shots. So this, while I'm sure they, even in non-conflict times, they are probably having a similar kind of agenda, similar narratives, but the degree to which they were near identical really, really struck me. And of course, the most shocking thing was that there was no coverage of the actual military action whatsoever, including any mention of losses or casualties of any kind. So it was weak. The whole, by the way, another important point is that in Russia it's called the special operation, and the media are prohibited from calling it a war on the danger of being basically penalized or shut down in the worst case scenario. And so even though the entire program constantly explained why Russia needs to be there, why Russia is taking this action, there was not a single shot, not a single number, not a single statistic, nothing about the actual Russian military action. So the closest it came to it was a report on those, the militia of one of the kind of separatist republics capturing this one village. So this is, and when they were talking about, so they talked about, right, so they talked about how Russians only target military infrastructure. They called it, many reports called it surgical across many reports, so to imply that, no civilians, Ukrainian civilians suffered in this, versus the claim that Ukrainians are kind of hiding behind civilians. So there was mention of it, there was reference to it, only in this sense, but nothing nothing concrete and no kind of video evidence of any sort. And so what I want to do next is give you a deeper dive into two segments from this programming to make kind of two different points. So one will be about the capturing of this Chernobyl, and that part conveys kind of, again, to show you to break down the constitutive parts of the narrative using this kind of one specific example. And the second one will be a bit of a cautionary sort of tale about how to approach information and misinformation and disinformation from all sides, not just the Russian side. So Chernobyl, again, just in case, is a nuclear power plant in northern Ukraine, bordering close to Belarus. It there was a on the word, an explosion, I suppose, right? Kind of a catastrophe in 1986. A lot of people died. This was one of the things that led to the dissolution of the Soviet Union, because the authorities tried to keep the information suppressed about it, that the information spread, and so this was one of the many contributing factors to kind of the disillusion with the Soviet authorities and the eventual collapse or demise of the Soviet Union. So basically it has been not functioning since then, but there are some people stationed who are making sure that the radiation is kept at a certain level, that it doesn't go out, etc., etc. And so last week, Ukrainian President Zelensky mentioned that Ukraine might sort of consider re-nuclearizing themselves and possibly attaining nuclear weapons of some sort. And so the Russian troops captured this the plant in one of the first days, and so the capturing is framed as is the whole campaign, through the frames of inevitability and this being a preventative measure. So in a very, I guess, like Orwellian style of war is peace, peace is war, all of it is framed as stopping war, preventing war, of being put in a position where Russia had no choice but to act. And so the same is translated here, that Russia could not act, because otherwise nationalists and radicals would kind of seize Chernobyl and make a so-called dirty bomb, which is, it takes a while to develop an actual nuclear bomb, but kind of this low tech, if you will, so to speak, dirty bomb, which disseminates radiation but doesn't actually have the explosive, the kind of the nuclear explosive in it. So again, this broader frames of inevitability and that this is inevitable in terms of Russia had no choice and preventative, that Russia is trying to prevent a greater catastrophe, were applied here to this very specific case. The second frame is about how Russia's actions are sort of humane and peaceful. So I mentioned about this, the surgical strikes on infrastructure. So again, there was no fighting here. No one kind of put up resistance. So this is shown as, again, the Russian troops are sort of almost like being welcomed and are not having to use their arms even to capture these infrastructural sites only that they are supposedly interested in. And lastly, because the people guarding it, sort of the Ukrainian military and the staff, so the kind of the scientists that are keeping an eye on the station, they're now collaborating with the Russian military and Russian scientists to basically again ensure that everything's fine, the radiation's there. And so this is framed as because Putin last week kind of addressed directly the Ukrainian military and said, you guys and us, we can find common ground better than those, and he used those words, drug addicts and Nazis, referring to the political leadership of Ukraine. And so this is an example of basically how, if you're a Ukrainian soldier but you don't put up resistance, if you basically come to the other side, if you're just willing to peacefully work with us, this is kind of a model for going forward how this could play out, or a promise of how this would play out should the Ukrainian side kind of not put up resistance and willingly collaborate, let's say. And this is a shot of them, of a Russian soldier and the Ukrainian soldier. You can see the Ukrainian flag here on the arm, just kind of monitoring the security cams and working together. So this is kind of a microcosm of the general framing and narratives around the whole thing, basically, the Russia's using. And the second report that I want, or the second segment that I want to focus on is, again, a cautionary tale, or the cautionary example for all of us to treat information from all sides very carefully and basically not take anything at face value. Because during armed conflict especially, each side acts as a propagandist of its own governments, of its own people, which is totally understandable. I'm not making a value or a moral judgment here, right? So it's both an emotional reaction. If you're if you're a Ukrainian journalist in Kyiv, and you're being bombed, then naturally you're gonna sort of side with your government. But also it's a matter of logistics, because during war you cannot verify these numbers. The only numbers you're getting are from the officials, whether it's Ukrainian officials, whether it's Russian officials, in terms of casualties, in terms of demolition and destruction to infrastructure. There is no way you can actually verify any of that. So you're basically, not only are you emotionally invested in your side, but you're also retranslating whatever information you get from the top-down authorities, and you're kind of forced to, even if you want to abandon being a critical journalist who takes time to verify, to check, also because things are moving very quickly. So this is a very particular situation. I mean, at all times we should be critical of the media we consume, but at these times especially, no matter where our sympathies lie in terms of who are the bad guys, who are the good guys, because there is a lot of, especially misinformation. The distinction, just to remind, the misinformation is sort of unintentional distortion, and disinformation is intentional distortion. So especially misinformation that gets retweeted. Again, I thought to include some examples. I didn't, but there are so many examples of very well-meaning U.S. pundits or journalists with hundreds of thousands, with millions of followers, retweeting something completely unverified, which turns out to be, which for at least people following this thing, like to me in a number of cases was very obviously complete, BS, pardon my language, to begin with, but even in a number of cases, even when they're called out, they're like, well, I said it was reportedly. I didn't say it was a fact. I said it was reportedly, and what do you expect of me? You expect me to verify every single thing, right? Well, kind of, yeah. If you have 1 million followers, then we do. And then imagine how few people out of everyone who saw the news actually follows up on that, right? So it's out there. It's already out there. People already think of it as a fact. And so this is kind of what happened here. And so again, I don't know how closely you've been following, but this event happened in the early days of Russia's invasion. This is a Snake Island, a Ukrainian island, a tiny island, as you can see, off the coast of between Ukraine and Romania. And the piece of so Ukrainian military are stationed there. And so the piece of information that got into the news is this radio intercept in which Russian ship was telling the Ukrainian soldiers stationed here that surrender, you're surrendered, so surrender willingly and peacefully, or we will use all our force. You have wives and children waiting for you. We want you to be, go home to your wife, to your families. But if you don't surrender, basically we have all this military power. No one's going to come out of this alive. And in response, the Ukrainian side basically says, Russian military ship, go fuck yourself. And this is the last that we knew of what was happening on this island. And so then all communication was lost. So it was presumed that they indeed were destroyed and the island was captured by the Russians. And there was a address by the president, Ukraine's president, who said that he would posthumously award them, the military awards. And so this Russian warship, go fuck yourself, became an instant kind of cultural phenomenon, cultural meme, because it is, an almost a story worthy of like, a Hollywood kind of movie. And I mean this not sarcastically, in the best sense of the word. So, it got its own Wikipedia page. It was all over the world news because again, it is were it actually true. It does. You hear that the recording, like the last words of people, willing to tell them to go F themselves instead of surrendering. Right? It's kind of a paradigmatic heroic war story. Some people already kind of tattooed on their. On themselves, so this became an instant meme. And meme, I don't mean it derogatorily. I mean just as a cultural meme, cultural phenomenon, cultural symbol. And so then, when I was watching all those Russian TV shows, there was reporting on saying that the Ukrainian side actually was lying or was wrong. All of these people from the Snake Island are alive. Here they are. There was actually not 13 of them, but 82. Here they are, disembarking the ship. They're provided with food. After they signed the agreement saying that they're not going to participate in any military action, they will be released home to their families. They're all, safe and sound. There are interviews with some of them, conducted with some of them. And I'm sitting there thinking, what the hell is going on? Like, is this Russian, propaganda gone completely bonkers and just like staging some actors and thinking that Russian population are, know completely nothing about this or are going to believe everything? And then I'm thinking, no, like even for Russian propaganda, this, this must be too much. Like, come on, how far can they push it? So I'm sitting there like, completely kind of baffled and just like not knowing what to think. And so I see it on every single show that I watch. There's this segment with again the same exact different correspondents, same exact shots and everything. And so I'm sitting there waiting. And so ultimately, in another 2 days, the Ukrainian side confirms that indeed they are alive and they lost communications and they were with them after that exchange and they were presumed to be dead for that reason. But indeed they're alive. They're prisoners of war, and they're held by the Russians. So it did prove to be true, in this case, right? This Russian debunking of this misinformation proved to be true. And again, everyone was acting in good faith, right? The Ukrainian authorities, in good faith, presumed that they were dead. They communicated it. The people took up, it spread like wildfire because of its sort of kind of heroic nature. Again, and unfortunately and luckily that weren't the case, right? Of course. So these things, they spread like wildfire, basically. And so there is so much mis and disinformation that even if sort of the history is on your side, so to speak, right, you are voluntarily or involuntarily involved in the dissemination of it a lot of the times. And so again, this is just my call to be very critical, very, take everything with a grain of salt. Whichever side it comes from, and especially if it sort of aligns with what you hope or you expect to happen or want to happen, to be critical. And so just to conclude very briefly, again, to return to the point that should you want alternative information, should you want alternative reporting and narratives, they are available to you even in today's Russia. So for example, here on the right, as I mentioned, Russian mainstream media do not report on any prisoners of wars, only on the Ukrainian side, right? One of the narratives, one of the frames is that Ukrainian military do not want to fight. They're actually completely demoralized. They're surrendering themselves to the Russian side, while not a single word is said about the Russian side. But there are obviously a lot of Russian prisoners of war at this point already. And so this is a reporting by one of Russia's sort of less standing alternative or non-state aligned channels, right? This is one of those prisoners of war. There was an interview with his parents. As of last night, it had 2.8 million views, which, not nothing. Presuming that those people probably told someone else, et cetera, et cetera. So here's another one about the radio or audio intercept in the lead up to the invasion between the Chechen leader and his kind of main military guy, kind of pre-planning this operation. So things are out there. Again, if you are Russian, if you have internet access, you can go online and access that information. It's just a matter of whether you come online with your pre-existing identity that tells you, or beliefs or political views that tells you to seek that information, or whether you are online and consuming the same kind of information online as you would, let's say, on TV. And these are just examples of social media as well, not just kind of media institutions or media organizations, but social media as well. A lot of prominence. So this is the most popular TV personality. This is the most popular YouTube personality. Each of one of them took a very kind of explicitly anti-war stance and came out against the war immediately to their followers. So against one had 340,000 likes, another had 1 million likes. And again, I think this is my last slide, I suppose. So the conclusion here is that basically, so we know what's out there, right? We know there is 1 million people put likes on this post, and he has 5.5 million or 5 million followers. So they saw that this person has 10 million followers. So we know what's out there. We know the narratives that are out there. We know some of the reactions. But audience studies are much more difficult than studies of the messaging. And so studies of reception and audiences. So while we, as my title suggests, while we may know what Russians know or can know, should they want to know, it is really, really difficult to conclude or jump to conclusions about what Russians think, how they interpret this, and again, let alone how they will act based on the information that they're receiving. And so, yeah, we have just under 10 minutes, so thank you very much. So yeah, I think let's just continue being critical of the information and trying to get as many sources as we possibly can, and not take anything at face value, especially during basically wartime, which is a good advice for this or any future conflict. All right, so thank you very much, and yeah, we have a little bit of time.
Thank you very much, Stas. I'm curious, as a big European media person myself, one thing that I found very interesting is, to a lot of the Russian people, the sanctions didn't mean much until it started to become media sanctions. Specifically in my mind is seeing all of my family posting about when Eurovision was now pulled from Russia, how it's sanctions that finally matter. And I'm wondering if you have any insight on kind of the reaction of I guess the Russian people towards these media sanctions that they're seeing, kind of the disconnect that the world is taking away from them as well, from sports to Eurovision.
Yeah, I was just going to mention sports as well before you did, because yeah, so it's not just like economic sanctions this time, they're much more all-encompassing. All of Russian, I know for a fact at least soccer, which is the sport that I follow personally, all of Russia, the national team, the clubs have been pulled from all the competitions. I believe that also is the case already for many other sports. So that's a great question, and I don't have any information as of yet, because this is literally happening as we speak. It happened a day or two. Again, viewing these alternative sources, seeing commentators obviously being upset, or commentators as in like in the comments, both lay people and commentators, the experts who go on and comment. But so basically, we don't have data yet, and I'm sure that it will have, once it's felt, once it's personal, I'm sure it will have a different effect. And already, even though again we don't know exactly what's going on, but this time around it's very different from 2014 when Russian annexed Crimea, supported the separatists in eastern Ukraine. It is very different in terms of the both protests in the streets, even though the situation right now is way worse in terms of the consequences that you're facing for protesting the government in the streets. There are kind of cultural personalities, actors, singers, etc., coming out. A lot of them coming out in support of the state, to be sure, but a lot of them are also coming out against this, such as these people. So there is a lot of, well, not a lot of, but there are a number of journalists resigning, doing so both publicly and not publicly. Again, I don't know if we can speak of a mass exodus yet, but it is definitely a phenomenon we did not see necessarily in 2014. So things are different, and I suspect that the flights being canceled, the visas being canceled, the sports being canceled, in addition to those general, financial things that Russia has already been under since 2014, are going to have somewhat of a greater effect. I would imagine, but we don't have any data yet.
Yeah, I have a couple questions. I'll ask the one that is most getting at me first, and then the second one for you, time, and nobody else's question. Yeah, you mentioned that prominent Russian figures in entertainment and et cetera are coming out against the war in Ukraine. I've also looked at some of the open letters out there. There's one actually, not only people in the entertainment business, but there's a letter with a number of signatures from officials, ecclesiastical officials in the Russian Orthodox Church that came out that I saw this morning. Do you see any evidence, though, that these prominent figures are actually joining in the protests and getting out on the streets with the people, the Russian people who are brave enough to actually risk apprehension and imprisonment? That's my first question.
Yeah, I've just to quickly answer. I've not seen that, but it doesn't mean it's not happening. I just have not. There's so much information out there. It's impossible to monitor.
I mean, it could be that We just don't know about it?
Right, I know that sort of the kind of the intellectuals, university professors, if you want to call them celebrities, I don't know, but
Yeah.
the ones that go into that are media personalities, that are public intellectuals, again, they're celebrities within a fairly small
Right.
circle of people,
Right.
but I know for a fact that they have been detained
Mhm.
or protested, and some of them then detained. So I don't know about like this guy, right, Russia's main TV personality.
Yeah,
I don't think he's been out in the streets. But honestly, in this day and age, obviously street protest, is important. It's a symbolic gesture, but I don't know what's more important, that he shows up in the street. I mean, if he shows up in the street, that will be against a symbolic gesture of a level of defiance by this kind of cozy media elites that we have not seen in years. But even barring that, speaking directly to 10 million people and being the most famous kind of media personality, that already is pretty big. So, yeah. So I don't know if being physically there, it is important, and it's a step further. I agree with you, and maybe we'll see that. But I think this is already significant enough, and definitely is different from 2014.